Good morning, grade 5. Welcome back. Before we get into our lesson, I just wanted to take 1 second to just say hello and let all of you know that I'm thinking about you, that I miss you, that it's just not the same here at school without all of you. So I hope that you're all staying healthy, staying safe, and getting some time to enjoy this time with your family. I know it's a little bit different, but we'll try our best. We still have some math to go, so we'll go through this lesson. We're starting today on comparing fractions. Just to let you know, before we get into this, you have some math resources that I sent home to your parents. So if you can get access to that and get some fraction strips, that will help you with the lesson and then with the worksheet that we're going to be doing later on today. So let's take a look at the first slide that we have here. And it asks us a question: would you get a bigger piece of chocolate if you have to share it between 2 people or between 3 people? So we have 2 fractions set up, and I just wanted to point out, just as a little review, how when we have a fraction, we're taking equal parts of a whole. So here we have 2 parts of a whole, so that's halves, and that would be 1 out of 2. Now in the second one we have here, we've divided it into 3 equal parts, 1, 2, 3, so that's thirds. If you divide it into 4 equal parts, it would be fourths, 5 equal parts, fifths. So anytime you see that, just remember that these are all equal parts. And just another hint there is that however many parts there are, whether it's 2 here or 3 here, that's going to be what your denominator is when you're writing your fraction. But let's just go back to that first question. Would you get a bigger piece of chocolate if you have to share it between 2 people or between 3 people? And if you look and line up your fraction strips here, you can see that this part, just by looking at it, not even knowing the numbers, this part is bigger than that part. So if you're only dividing equally between 2 people, that's going to be a bigger piece. You're going to get more than if you are dividing it up between 3 people. And just looking at this, 1/2 of the chocolate bar is more than 1/3 of the chocolate bar. And that was what I was saying. We can write these as a fractions. There's 2, our denominator. We have 1 part shaded. That's what we put on top as our numerator. So here, 3, denominator, 1 part shaded, 1, 1/2, 1/3. And hopefully all of you remember what that sign means, greater than. So 1/2 is greater than 1/3. Now, taking a look at this, again, now we're comparing 2 fractions, 1/2 or 2/3. Wanting to know which fraction is bigger. And this just goes how you're gonna, when you're using your fraction strips, when you're going ahead and trying to compare fractions visually, how you line it up, how you shade in. So if you look at here, you've got the 2/3 shaded. That's still the same fraction, 2/3. 1/2 here, but it's a lot harder to visually see this and to say, okay, 2/3 is bigger than 1/2. So if you do it like this when you're shading in, it'll just make it a lot easier to tell which one is bigger. So that's just a tip kind of when we're doing that. And again, this is kind of the same thing. Does this picture make it easy to tell which is bigger, 1/2 or 2/3? Only thing that I want to remind you is that when you're using your fraction strips, make sure you line them up together. As you can see here, this will make it easier. So you line these up, make sure they're even, just so you can tell, because really it's an easy way to compare fractions if you have the fraction strips there in front of you. And so, reminder, you will need that. It will really help if you have that when you're doing your exercises later on today. to the next one, comparing the fractions. So basically what we want to do here is we want to look at each of these fractions and then compare them. We can order them. We can say which one's greater than which one. And I'll just show you how to do that really quickly. So we look here, just a reminder, 2/3, because we have 1, 2, 3 parts. There's our denominator, our 3. 2 of them are shaded. There's our numerator. So 2/3, 2/3. 1/2, because we've got 2 parts. Denominator there, 2. 1 part is shaded. That's our numerator. 3/4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 equal parts. There's our denominator. How many of those are shaded? 3. 1, 2, 3. We put that on top as our numerator. And finally, 3/5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 parts denominator, 3 parts shaded numerator. So if you just remember that, the whole, however many parts each whole is divided into is the number that goes on bottom. However many parts are shaded goes on top. Now, if we want to compare these, just take a look, and I'll just give you a second to think about it. Think which one is going to go first. Which is the bigger one? And this is really something you can just look at this and see. So when I look at it, see, okay, what has most shaded? 3/4. So I know that's going to be number 1, biggest. Then I look again, okay, where's our great 2/3? Number 2. Then we've got 2 left. And which has more of that whole shaded? 3/5. So that would leave 1/2 as the least here. Now, if you wanted to write these fractions comparing using greater than and less than, so we could say like this: 3/4 is greater than 2/3 is greater than 3/5 is greater than 1/2. So we've compared all the fractions, we've ordered them, we're using our greater than signs. So that's just, if you're being asked to compare fractions like that, that's a way that you can do it. And when you have your fraction strips, it makes it pretty easy to just visually see that, so you know which one is bigger, which one has a larger percentage of the whole shaded. Moving on to the next slide, which are some exercises. And just a reminder here, writing the correct sign, less than or greater than. And there was even a little hint down here that symbol means greater than, and pointing the other way means less than. So you want the open end facing the bigger fraction. Now I put some fraction strips down here to make it easier, and I'll show you just how we look at these fractions and then shade it in so that we can compare them. So in exercise A, I've got 2/3. So first thing I need to do is look down at my denominator, 3. So I know I'm going to look for the strip that's divided into 3 equal parts. So there's just 1 whole, there's 2 equal parts, here's 3. So this is what I need. So I've got my 3, because it's thirds. Then I look at my numerator, 2. So I know, okay, there's going to be 2 of those sections that are shaded in. So I'll just kind of do this just to show you. So I've got that. So there's my 2/3. And I can write it here just to remind myself that that is what fraction I'm showing here. Then I look at 1/2. Look at my denominator, it's 2. I've got 2 equal parts here. This is what I'm going to need. There's 1 of those 2, so I'm going to shade in that one. And then now, if I look at my squiggly line shaded in, I can easily see that 2/3 is greater than 1/2. So just written like that, 2/3 is greater than 1/2. So as long as you figure out which strip that you need to use, and then look at your numerator, shade in the correct ones, it's pretty easy to see which one is going to be bigger. So we'll look at exercise B as well. 1/2, look at my denominator. Here's my strip that's divided into halves. There's one that's shaded. So there's my 1/2. 3/4. So now I've got a new denominator that we haven't seen before, fourths. So now we're looking into the strip divided into 4 equal parts. 1, 2, 3, 4. How many are shaded? 3, because I look at the numerator and that'll tell me how many parts of that whole. So 1, 2, 3. 3/4. Again, looking at those, comparing them, 3/4 is greater than 1/2. The way this is written, 1/2 is less than 3/4. You can say these statements either way. 3/4 is greater than 1/2. 1/2 is less than 3/4. Moving on to C, 2/3 and 3/4. So I look at my denominator. Here's my thirds, 1, 2, 3. 2 of them are colored in. Then 3/4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 3 of them because of the numerator. 1, 2, 3. 3/4. 2/3. Looking here, we've got more of that filled in. So 3/4 is greater than 2/3. And finally, D. I've got 3/4. I just wrote that, so I can leave that one there. Makes it a little bit easier. So 3/4. Now we move on to fifths. So I'm looking for my strip with 5 equal parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many of them are filled in? 3. 1, 2, 3. 3/5. And we see that 3/4 is going to be greater. Just to when you're looking, comparing fractions, and right now we're just doing it visually, but just something that I've seen kids get confused on sometimes is that they'll look at these numbers and say, okay, 3 equals 3, 3 is the same. And so it's not, don't worry about that number to compare the fractions or even that, because it's parts of a whole. So don't let that confuse you, because you're looking at the whole thing, not just the numerator, because it's not equal, even though we've got 3's up here. And sometimes you'll have a bigger numerator that's going to be less than a fraction with a smaller numerator. So just keep that in mind. So make sure when you're doing these that you're looking at your fraction strips and using that to compare these fractions. Okay, we have some more exercises here. So I'll go through these. These are bonus ones. 1/2 and 5/8. So for E for 1/2, there we go. Now this time I've got to look for eighths. So I'm going to go all the way down. So we've got 8 equal parts, and you can count that. Those are 8 equal parts, and we've got 5 of those. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now if you have your resources and have cut them out, you can line them up easier, but you can still see this is where 1/2 goes to, so 5/8 is going to be greater than 1/2. For F, 2/3 and 5/8. I'll keep my 5/8. So now I'm looking at thirds. 1, 2. Because of my numerator, I know I have to color in 2. Now this one, it's a little bit trickier to see but if we extend that line, we're going to see that 2/3 is going to be bigger than 5/8. There's 2/3. 3/4 and 5/8. Again, we have the 5/8, so I'm keeping that down there. then 3/4. So I look to my fourths. 1, 2, 3. Now this time, put this down. 3/4 greater than 5/8. And then finally, 3/5. And so if we look at 3/5, we look at our fifths. Here's our fifths. I know that I need to shade in 3 because of my numerator. So 1, 2, 3. 3/5 is less than 5/8. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, so now we're doing something a little bit different, and I kind of showed you at the first example how we can take these and write fractions. So what you're being asked to do here is write the fraction to represent the shaded region. So the first thing that we need to do is figure out how many equal parts we're dividing this whole into. So we count how many there are all together. So 1, 2, 3. So I'm dividing it into thirds. And so that number, however many parts there are, that's our denominator. So I'm going to write that on the bottom. Then the next thing I'm going to do is figure out how many are shaded. 1, 2. So 2 out of the 3 would be how we write that fraction. 2/3 is another way to say that. So 2/3, 2/3. So our numerator is going to be our shaded portion. Our denominator is how many parts the whole is divided into. So next one, I'll take a look. I'm going to count all of them first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So there's 12 parts of a whole. That's my denominator. And then I'm going to look how many are shaded. 1, 2, 3. So 3/12 would be how we write that fraction. So again, when you look at how many parts there are that whole has been divided into, that's your denominator. The shaded number is your numerator. So here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we've got 3 of those shaded. And in this final example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, with 5 of them shaded. Now again, as the example I showed earlier where it's asking you to compare the fraction, so I'm looking for which one is bigger, because if you notice I've got greater than signs here. So I need my biggest one there, and if I look at these, I can see this one on the bottom has the most sections shaded, so it's 5/6 is greater than, my next would be 3/4, which is greater than 2/3, which is greater than 3/12. And just if you look at these fractions, this is just what I was mentioning a couple minutes ago about how don't get thrown off by the numerators and the denominators being bigger, because it's not always. We've got a 12 here, which is the smallest one. So don't think, oh, I see a 12. 12 is the biggest number that I see, so that must be the biggest. You have to look at the whole thing, take a look at the fraction strips, and that will help you to compare them. So just don't get confused by looking at those numbers and then comparing it as a number, because we're talking about parts of a whole. So it might make things a little bit confusing, but if you use the fraction strips, you should be good with figuring out which one's bigger than the other one. Okay, so let's take a look, and I'll run through these kind of quickly. For our exercises here, it's asking to write greater than, less than, or equal to. This will kind of get in because we'll start showing that you can have fractions that are equivalent even if they have different numbers. They can still represent the same amount. So let's take a look at a 3/5. So I look at my denominator. See, I need to find my strip that's divided into 5 equal parts here. And I've got 3 of them colored in, so 3/5. Then I've got 6/10. So now I'm looking for a strip that's divided into 10 equal parts, which is down here in the green, and I need to color in 6 of them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So I look at my 3/5. I look at my 6/10. And if you look, what do you notice here? And it might be a little bit hard to see, but I've got a meter stick so I can show you. But if we take that and line up what we've shaded here, it's the same. So what would we use here? We'd use an equal sign. So 3/5 is equal to 6/10. So keep that in mind, that you can have different numbers with your fractions and they can be equal. And that's why these fraction strips, if you have those in front of you and can line them up, it can really show that and make it easier to see that. So hopefully you were able to get those out. But you look there, they both line up the same, so 3/5 equals 6/10. Now my second one has 6/10 again, but now I've got 3/6. So I look for my 6th because of my denominator. I can color in 3 of those. Now though, I see we've got more shaded in down in the tenths. So 6/10 is greater than 3/6. For the next one, now I've got 3/4. So I look for my 4ths here. 1, 2, 3. And then 4/6. So I colored in 3. I'm going to color in 1 more. I've got 3/4, 4/6. And make sure I color that in all the way so I don't confuse myself. If I look here, we've got 3/4, and that comes down past the 4/6, so 3/4 is greater than 4/6. And we've got here on D, finally, 3/4 and 6/8. I've got my 3/4 already colored in. I'll take 6/8, so I'll go down to my 8ths. I need to color in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's break out the trusty meter stick and see, but this looks like this could be another fraction that's equal. If you put that there, you could see that they are. So 3/4 is equal to 6/8. So hopefully with having fraction strips, this should be something that you can pretty easily visualize. Okay. And here's another couple of examples here. So 1/2 and 3/6. So here's my halves. There's that. Then 6, 3/6. 1, 2, 3. And again, since I can't move these around, but I'll just put them like that and see that 1/2 is equal to 3/6. For number, or letter F rather, 1/2 and 4/6. And so I've got my 1/2. Now I'm going to do though 4/6. So now I see that the sixths are going to be greater. So 1/2 is less than 4/6. I've got 4/6 here, but now I need 2/3. So I look at the denominator. There's my thirds. How many need to be shaded? 2. So there we go, 2/3 and 4/6. And it looks like we have another equivalent fraction again. So 2/3 and 4/6 are going to be equal. And finally, letter H, 1/2. There's my halves. We'll color in 1. We'll find our eighths because we have 6/8 here. Remember, look at the denominator to know which fraction strip you need to use. There's my eighths divided into 8 equal parts. 6 of them are shaded in. I know that from my numerator, so I'll color that all in. And I go up, I see 6/8 is greater than 1/2, or as it's written here, 1/2 is less than 6/8. So hopefully that is pretty clear how we take these fractions and can represent them on the fraction strip, how we can have a fraction strip and then turn it into a fraction based on what kind of shading we're seeing. And take a look at this question here, and I'll just go back, and I've kind of already touched on this and talked about this a little bit, but what we have here are 2 fractions that have different numbers but actually show the same amount. So if you look back at pairs of fractions in the previous exercises that look different but represent the same amount. So I'm just going to go back to that last page, give you all at home a second to think about that, and think about which ones, if you can remember, have different numbers but show the same amount. And hint, there are 2 of them here that had that. See, normally this would be the point that everyone would have their hands raised and I'd be calling on someone, but hopefully you're thinking of it at home, maybe even raising your hand at home. So 2 fractions, same amount, different numbers. If you remember E, 1/2 equals 3/6, and then G, 2/3 equals 4/6. The other 2, we did not have equivalent or equal fractions. So those were the 2. So that just shows you that you can have these different numbers. They can show the same amount because of how you're dividing a whole into equal parts. Okay, let's go right on to this one. Only 2 more slides left and then we're all done with today's lesson. So this one, and this kind of goes into equivalent fractions. And I wanted to show you this because I just think it might help you visualize these equivalent fractions. So it's asking us to find the missing denominator. So we have here 1/3, and we know that that's going to be a 3 as a denominator because we have 3 equal parts. We see that one part is shaded. So there's our 1. Now this is the part where it gets a little bit tricky because we have, if you can see, these are lined up. We have the same thing, same amount shaded, but it's asking for the missing denominator. So I want you to see here though, here we've got a 1, right? Because we've got 1 box shaded. Here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hence we have the 4 as our numerator. Now, you see here though that there are 2 more boxes. But if you notice, this is divided into 4. So with this example, with this question, you need to make sure that you're also dividing each of these other boxes that are left over also into 4, because that's the only way you're going to be able to find your denominator, because 4 equals this 1 part, so we need to extend that all the way through the entire fraction strip. I'll try to make these as equal as possible, but I didn't do a good job, but we'll pretend that it's equal. That looks a little bit better. So notice in this first spot, I've got 4. I put 4 here, put 4 here. Now I can find the denominator because now I can count up all of the parts of the whole. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So our missing denominator is 12. And this is just getting a little bit of ahead, but something that you might notice is that if you look at comparing the numerator to numerator, denominator to denominator, they have both increased by a certain amount. And they've both increased by a factor of 4. So we've multiplied 1 times 4, 3 times 4. And once we start getting into equivalent fractions, and when we're trying to compare fractions and changing numerators and denominators, that'll be an important thing. One that we know that whatever change we make to the numerator, we also make to the denominator, and that when you multiply them, you can then create equivalent fractions. And it works the same way doing the inverse if you're dividing, because if you divided both of these by 4, you'd get back to 1/3 as well. So just something, not what we're working on now, but just something to keep in the back of your mind as we move on with fractions. And last slide. So let's see what we have here. Number 2, complete the fraction using the pictures. And this is the same thing. We're showing, equivalent fractions. So we've got our 1/4. We've got our whole divided into 4 parts. We've got 1 part shaded, so there's 1/4. Now, we've been given the denominator, so that's going to clue us in that there must be 100 boxes here. So there's our denominator, 100. Now we need to know how many are shaded. You could go and just count them all. Another thing you could do, you could see how many are in each row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many are in each column? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Multiply that. 5 times 5 equals 25. So we've got 25 shaded. So 1/4 equals 25 over 100. When we're talking about fourths, a lot of times the way I like to think about that is with money, and that a quarter is 25 parts of 100, so 25 cents out of $1. And may not work for you, but that's just a lot of times when I think of quarters, I think of that. So 25, 50, 75, and 100. So last one here, B. 2/5 equals something over 10. So I've got 2/5, which I have represented here, because I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2 are shaded. Then to find the other one, okay, I know my denominator already, so I know I have 10 equal parts. Then I just need to count what is shaded. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4/10. 2/5 equals 4/10. Again, if you notice, like here, 1 times 25, 4 times 25 equals 100, 2 times 2 equals 4, 5 times 2 equals 10. So whatever operation you're doing to the numerator, you do to the denominator to get equivalent fractions. So that is all for our lesson today. I'll be putting up lessons going forward for each section. Hopefully that helped explain if you had any questions, but if anything else comes up, feel free to send me an email. Your parents will have my email address, or if you have your parents call me or something, and we can discuss it if we need to. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me. I will be also, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, trying to set up some times where we can meet together through Zoom, so we can actually see each other. Maybe some kids need to call in, where if we have questions with math, we can work on small group work to go over some things. So that's all I have for today. So hopefully everyone has a wonderful day, and I'll see you all soon.